For 9 winters, Whistling Pine believed Scout had vanished with the woman she was sent to find. Then an old German shepherd appeared beneath a broken power line, frozen, scarred, and still facing north. Former Navy SEAL Callum Bracewell knew that direction. It was where one decision had haunted him for nearly a decade. But Scout had not returned to accuse him, and she had not come back carrying an easy answer. What she remembered would force an entire town to face the difference between guilt, truth, and responsibility. And when the past finally opened, Callum would learn that redemption was not about changing one terrible night. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Winter came to Whistling Pine without ceremony. It simply settled over the town, one pale layer at a time, until the roofs disappeared beneath white shoulders. The spruce branches bowed low, and the frozen river behind Callum Bracewell's cabin became a long blue scar through the valley. Whistling Pine sat several hours from Fairbanks, depending on weather, road crews, and whether the moose felt cooperative. Its population was small enough that a dark window was noticed, a missed church supper was discussed, and any truck parked outside the general store for more than 10 minutes became part of public knowledge. Callum preferred the river. The river asked no questions. At 51, he lived alone in a square log cabin built close enough to the bank that winter wind sometimes drove powdered snow beneath the porch. He had reinforced the roof himself, replaced the chimney flashing twice, and arranged the interior with the severe practicality of a man who disliked objects without a purpose. A cast-iron stove, 1 table, 2 chairs, though only one was regularly used, hooks for insulated coats, a shelf of field manuals, a coffee mug with a chipped black rim, nothing on the walls except a county utility map. Callum worked as a power line maintenance technician for the borough, which meant he spent most days traveling roads other people avoided, repairing systems few noticed until they failed. He liked the honesty of electricity. A broken line did not pretend to be whole. A failed relay did not insist it was fine because discussing damage made others uncomfortable. Problems could be isolated, circuits could be tested, power could be restored. People rarely offered such clean arrangements. That evening, Callum stood at the kitchen counter, listening to the wind lean against the cabin while the emergency radio spat out outage reports. He wore a dark gray Henley beneath an old Navy cardigan, the sleeves pushed back from forearms marked by work rather than display. On the back of his right hand, a pale burn scar branched toward his wrist like a tiny frozen river. He turned the radio volume down when the dispatcher mentioned the North Feeder Road. Pole down near the bend above Wren's Cut. Possible conductor contact. 12 residences without power. Callum looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, snow moved sideways through the porch light. For several seconds, he did nothing. The North Feeder Road was only another road. Wren's Cut was only another stretch of timber and frozen ditch. The bend above it was only a location on the county map. That was how he had trained himself to think about it. Coordinates, terrain, access. Not the direction Scout had vanished, not the last place anyone had heard Junie Ahlstrom answer over a failing radio. Callum reached for his work coat. 9 winters earlier, Juniper Ahlstrom had been 27, not reckless, despite what people later claimed. She had worked as a terrain survey technician and knew the backcountry better than most men who offered opinions about her disappearance. She had gone out alone on skis to verify erosion markers before a storm front arrived earlier than forecast. By sunset, she had missed her check-in. By midnight, the storm had swallowed the upper trail. Callum had led the civilian search because he had the most command experience and because Whistling Pine believed past competence could be carried into any crisis like a tool. He had spent years in the Navy SEALs making decisions inside noise, darkness, and incomplete information. None of that had made the mountain obey him. Scout, the burro's 6-year-old German Shepherd search dog, had caught Junie's scent near the eastern timberline. Her handler, Benton Sayer, had followed until a falling limb struck him and tore the tracking line loose. Scout had gone on alone. The wind had reached dangerous force soon after. 2 volunteers began showing signs of hypothermia. Visibility collapsed. Callum had ordered the team back. It was the correct decision. He knew that in the same way he knew the freezing point of water. He had never forgiven himself for it. Callum pulled on his olive drab combat shirt beneath his utility layers, then fastened charcoal work pants, insulated boots, and a steel blue weather shell with reflective strips across the shoulders. His undercut hair, brown gone silver at the temples, disappeared beneath a wool cap before he stepped outside. The cold took hold immediately. His county truck started on the second turn, protesting with the tired groan of an animal dragged from sleep. Callum let the engine warm while he checked insulated gloves, grounding equipment, cutters, voltage detector, climbing harness, and emergency blankets. Then he drove north. Whistling Pine passed in pieces through the storm. The dark post office, the diner's yellow sign, the fire hall roof burdened with snow. Beyond the last houses, the road narrowed between black spruce and the frozen river. The headlights found only what was directly ahead. Everything else vanished. Callum drove slowly, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near the radio. He did not play music. He had once liked old country stations, but certain songs carried too many rooms inside them. At Wren's Cut, the wind had pushed a drift across half the road. He eased the truck through and saw the leaning pole beyond the bend. The top crossarm had split. One line sagged toward the riverbank, its dark cable almost invisible against the trees. Blue light flashed once near the ditch. Callum stopped well back. He switched on the roof beacon, reported his location, and stepped into the storm. Snow struck his face like handfuls of grit. He moved deliberately, testing each step, studying the pole angle, conductor height, surrounding water, and possible backfeed from private generators. Then something moved below the line. At first, Callum thought it was torn insulation shifting in the wind. The shape lay near a clump of alder where river debris had collected against the bank. It moved again, not machinery. An animal. Callum angled his flashlight downward. A German Shepherd lay half buried in snow and netting. She was old. That was the first clear thing about her. Her muzzle was heavily silvered, and the black and gold coat beneath the ice had lost the thick fullness of youth. A torn fishing net had wrapped around her chest and rear legs, pinning her against a buried log. One ear stood crookedly. The other bore a small crescent-shaped notch. The dog lifted her head. Her eyes caught the beam, one amber dark and sharp, the other slightly clouded. Callum's breath stopped for half a beat. Not because he recognized her. Because some memories lived in posture rather than faces. The dog did not thrash. She watched him approach with the exhausted discipline of an animal, conserving what little strength remained. "Easy," Callum said. His voice sounded strange in the weather. He moved to the left, intending to circle away from the sagging conductor. The snow near the ditch had melted into a shallow gray pool beneath a skin of ice. The shepherd suddenly growled. It was not loud. It was barely more than vibration. Callum stopped. The dog forced her front legs beneath her body. The net tightened across her ribs. Her rear legs trembled violently, but she pushed herself sideways, placing her body between him and the frozen pool. "Stay down." She ignored him. Callum stepped once toward the water. The shepherd bared her teeth and gave a single hoarse bark. A blue spark snapped beneath the ice. Then came the smell. Ozone. Sharp, metallic, wrong. Callum backed away at once. The conductor had energized the water beneath the snow. Perhaps the dog had stepped into it earlier. Perhaps pain was the only lesson she needed. She did not understand voltage. She understood that the ground had bitten her, and she was trying to keep him from being bitten too. For a moment, Callum stood in the storm looking at an animal who could barely hold herself upright and had still chosen warning over silence. Something old and carefully contained shifted inside him. Not hope. Hope was too bright a word. Recognition, perhaps. He returned to the truck, contacted dispatch, confirmed the feeder shutdown, then tested twice before approaching again. Only when the detector remained dark did he cross the snow. The shepherd had collapsed. "I listened," he told her, kneeling beside the net. "You can stop arguing." One ear flicked. Callum worked the cutters beneath the frozen cords. Several strands had cut through the fur at her flank, but there was no fresh bleeding, only raw skin and old scars. The mesh around her rear leg had stiffened into a cage of ice. He removed his outer gloves for better control. The cold found his fingers instantly. "Bad planning," he murmured, "for both of us." The dog watched his hands. When the final section of net came loose, she tried to stand. Her front legs held. Her rear legs did not. Callum caught her before her chest struck the ground. She stiffened in his arms, but she did not bite. Up close, he could feel how little weight remained beneath the thick coat. Her ribs were too easy to count. Ice clung to her whiskers. Her breathing came shallow and measured against his wrist. Under the heavy fur at her neck, his fingers touched leather. A collar, not nylon, not modern gear. Hand-cut leather, dark with age, repaired in several places with thick, uneven stitches. Something metal hung beneath it, but the tag was so covered in frozen mud that he could not read it. Callum did not try. Not there. Not yet. He wrapped the shepherd in an emergency blanket, then lifted her. She was heavier than she appeared and lighter than she should have been. As he carried her toward the truck, her head rested briefly against his chest. Then she raised it again and looked north, past the damaged pole, past the road, toward the black timber where the storm erased distance. Callum followed her gaze. 9 years earlier, Scout had disappeared in that direction. He tightened his hold without realizing it. The dog gave no sign she noticed. Inside the truck, he laid her across the passenger seat, turned the heat low rather than high, and covered her with his spare insulated coat. Her paws twitched once when warmth reached them. Callum called dispatch. "Line is isolated," he said. "Pole needs a crew at first light." A pause. "You heading back?" He looked at the shepherd. Her clouded eye had closed. The clearer one remained fixed on him. "Yes," Callum said. "I found something." He drove home more slowly than before. The storm weakened near midnight, leaving the cabin surrounded by a silence so complete the river ice could be heard shifting beneath the snow. Callum laid the dog on folded blankets beside the stove. He warmed towels, set out water she did not drink, and cleaned away enough ice to check her breathing and gums. He had no right equipment for an animal this old. He knew enough to avoid doing harm. That had not always been enough. When he reached for the collar, the shepherd's eyes opened. Callum stopped. "All right." He left it in place. The metal tag rested against the blanket, dull beneath a crust of mud. Each time the dog breathed, it moved slightly and made a faint scraping sound. Callum sat in the second chair. He had not used it in months. Hours passed. The fire settled lower. Snow slid from the roof in soft avalanches. Once the dog appeared to drift toward sleep, but a gust struck the northern wall, and her head lifted immediately. She stared at the door. Callum watched her from across the room. He thought of a broken tracking line disappearing between trees. He thought of Benton shouting Scout's name into wind. He thought of Junie's final radio transmission, reduced by static to a few syllables no one could agree upon afterward. The shepherd did not whine. She did not ask to be let out. She simply remained awake, facing north with the patience of something that had waited longer than any living creature should have to wait. Near dawn, Callum rose and added another log to the stove. When he returned to his chair, the dog's clear eye followed him. "I'm not opening that door tonight," he said. Her ear shifted forward. It was the closest either of them came to agreement. Outside, the broken line lay powerless beneath the snow. Inside, the old dog kept watch over the direction from which she had come, while Callum sat beside her and felt for the first time in 9 years that the past had not finished traveling toward him. By morning, the storm had passed without apology. Whistling pine emerged beneath a sky so clear and pale it made the cold feel sharper. Snow covered the road, the woodpile, and the frozen river in smooth blue-white plains. Sunlight came through Callum's kitchen window and touched the old dog's coat for the first time. The change in light revealed what darkness had hidden. She was thinner than he had realized. Beneath the black saddle and faded gold fur, her hips rose too sharply. Silver spread from her muzzle to the corners of her eyes. One rear leg rested at an angle that suggested old damage rather than fresh injury. She had finally slept near dawn. Not deeply. Even while lying on the blankets beside the stove, she kept one ear turned toward the room. Callum had spent the remaining hours making calls he disliked. The borough dispatcher knew a veterinarian who still traveled in winter. The woman had been covering 3 settlements and a sled dog kennel north of Fairbanks, but she agreed to come when the road crew cleared the river bend. Callum did not ask why she said yes. He had learned that questions sometimes frightened help away. At 9:17, tires ground over packed snow outside the cabin. The vehicle that stopped beside his county truck was a white mobile veterinary van whose lower panels had disappeared beneath road salt and frozen mud. A red medical bag appeared first through the open door, followed by a woman in a dark teal coat. Dr. Farah Osi moved with the economy of someone accustomed to carrying too much equipment through bad weather. She was 46, compact and strong through the shoulders, with deep brown skin, bright watchful eyes, and small braids gathered into a low knot beneath a wool cap. A narrow streak of silver showed at her right temple when she pulled the hat off. She looked at Callum once, then past him. "Dog?" "Inside." "Good morning to you, too." He stepped aside. That was the greeting. Farah's mouth moved at one corner. Promising start. She entered carrying cold air, disinfectant, and the faint smell of peppermint from whatever she had been drinking in the van. The German shepherd lifted her head, but did not rise. Farah stopped several feet away. She did not reach for the dog immediately. Instead, she lowered herself onto one knee and let the room settle around her. "Hello, old lady." The shepherd watched. Farah opened her red bag, removed a soft strip of dried meat, and placed it on the floor between them. The dog sniffed, but did not move. "Suspicious," Farah said. "She has reason." "So do most of my patients. They still complain about the service." Callum folded his arms. Farah glanced at him. "You can stand like a courthouse statue if it comforts you. Just don't block the light." He moved without answering. The examination began slowly. Farah let the dog smell the stethoscope before touching her. She checked gums, eyes, paws, abdomen, and the range of motion in each leg. The shepherd endured most of it with tense dignity, though a low growl emerged when Farah pressed near the left hip. "That joint has been damaged before," Farah said. "Not yesterday. Years ago?" She ran practiced fingers along the rear leg. Beneath the thinning fur was a long, pale scar, uneven but fully healed. "Fracture?" "Possibly, or a severe ligament injury. Someone stabilized it." Callum looked down. "You're sure?" Farah raised her eyes. "Bodies remember care as clearly as they remember harm." The sentence landed harder than he expected. Farah continued. The dog was dehydrated, mildly underweight and exhausted, but her lungs sounded reasonably clear. Her heartbeat was slow and strong enough for her age. The cloudy right eye was likely age-related. There were pressure calluses on her elbows, but her nails told a more complicated story. These were worn on mixed surfaces, Farah said. Ice, dirt, maybe wood flooring. Some months she walked farther than others. She didn't spend 9 years entirely wild. Callum looked toward the old collar. It lay thick beneath the dog's neck, the leather dark and cracked, stitched in several places with coarse thread. She was being fed? At least sometimes, maybe housed for part of it, maybe by more than one person. That possibility unsettled him differently than survival alone. A dog living unseen in the forest was a mystery. A dog passing through human hands without being returned was a story with choices in it. Farah tapped 2 fingers against the floor, thinking. She needs warm fluids, food in small portions, anti-inflammatory medication after blood work, and no dramatic expeditions. I didn't suggest one. You've been staring at the north wall since I arrived. Callum's jaw shifted. Farah did not soften the observation. Men who stare at walls like that are usually planning something unwise or remembering something expensive. She was found near the old search area. That tells me where she collapsed, not where she came from. Callum looked at the dog. The shepherd's clearer left eye remained open, tracking the space between them. Farah reached for the collar. The dog stiffened. Callum saw it first. Wait. Farah stopped. He crouched beside the blankets and held out his hand. The dog smelled his knuckles. Her breathing slowed by a fraction. I need to get this off, he said. The words felt foolish, but he said them anyway. We're not taking it away. Farah watched him, then added quietly, We're checking whether it hurts. The shepherd's ears shifted. Callum slid 2 fingers under the leather. The collar was loose enough to move, but a section had rubbed the fur thin. He found the buckle and worked it free. When the leather came away, the dog raised her head sharply. Callum placed the collar where she could see it. She lay down again. Farah examined the inside. This wasn't factory-made. The stitching was thick and uneven, repaired with at least 2 different kinds of thread. Near the buckle, almost hidden beneath grime, 2 letters had been cut into the leather by hand. A.V. Callum traced them with his thumb. He knew no one immediately. That bothered him more than if he had. The tag hung from a small brass ring, its rectangular surface hidden beneath frozen mud and orange-brown corrosion. Farah carried it to the sink. Callum followed. You want to do this? She asked. No? Good answer. She filled a shallow bowl with warm water, not hot, then added a mild cleaning solution. The tag disappeared beneath the surface. They waited. Behind them, the old dog lifted her head and watched the sink. Farah worked with a gauze pad, slowly loosening dirt from the metal. A few letters appeared, then vanished again beneath another layer of residue. Callum's right hand rested against the counter. The branching burn scar across it had gone white. Farah noticed but said nothing. When the final layer came away, she turned the tag toward the window. The engraving was worn, but legible. Scout Whistling Pine Sar K. 9. Callum did not feel the chair behind him until it struck the backs of his knees. He sat. The kitchen remained exactly as it had been a moment before. The stove clicked as metal cooled. Snow slid from a spruce branch outside. Farah stood at the sink, holding the tag between gloved fingers. Yet the room had changed dimensions. 9 years entered it at once. Scout in a red harness moving across fresh snow. Benton Sayer's voice issuing hand signals. Junie's photograph pinned to a search board. Wind flattening radio calls into static. A severed tracking line whipping between the trees. Then darkness. Callum pressed both palms against his thighs. Farah placed the tag on a clean towel. Callum. He looked at her. Looked Breathe before you decide what this means. He had not realized he had stopped. Air returned with pain under his ribs. Across the room, Scout pushed herself upright. The movement was difficult. Her rear leg shook, but she stood long enough to look at him. Callum had imagined this dog dead for 9 years. In some dreams, she had returned young and furious. In others, she never looked at him at all. The animal before him was neither memory nor accusation. She was old, sore, hungry, and visibly irritated by the effort of standing. Farah followed his gaze. "You know her." "I knew her." Scout lowered herself again. The distinction mattered. Callum carried the collar back and set it beside the blankets. Scout leaned forward to smell it, then rested her chin near the leather. He tried her name. "Scout?" One ear moved, nothing else. He crouched. "Scout, come." No response. "Down." She was already down and appeared unimpressed by the redundancy. Farah leaned against the counter. "You expected 9 years to sit politely behind one command?" Callum ignored her. He tried the flat-handed recall signal Benton had used during training demonstrations. Scout turned her head away. The refusal tightened something in him. "She remembers." "Probably." "Then why?" "Memory is not obedience." Farah's voice remained calm. "She may remember the word, the tone, the place it belonged to, and everything that happened after it. Those things do not always lead to the same response." Callum stood. He moved toward the window, then stopped halfway there. Without thinking, he whistled 3 low notes. The sound was quiet, barely more than breath. Scout's head came up. Her body did not rise, but every part of her attention changed. Both ears angled forward. Her eyes fixed beyond Callum toward the northern door. The old gathering signal, used when visibility failed, used when teams needed to return to one point. Scout stared at the door for so long that Farah's expression lost its humor. Callum felt the past tighten its grip. But Scout did not scratch, whine, or attempt to leave. She only looked north, as if the command had reached her 9 years late. By noon, the news had escaped. Callum did not know whether the dispatcher told the road crew, or the road crew told the diner, or the diner simply sensed that the town had been deprived of information for nearly 3 hours. His radio rang twice, then his landline. He answered neither. Farah administered warmed fluids beneath Scout's skin, prepared a small meal, and wrote a medication schedule in precise block letters. Scout finally ate several bites and drank without encouragement. "That's enough," Farah said when Callum offered more. "She's hungry." "And old. Her stomach doesn't care about your guilt." He set the bowl aside. At 3:40, a vehicle stopped outside. Not the heavy idle of a county truck. A smaller engine, familiar from old mail routes. Callum knew who it was before the knock. Ione Alstrom stood on the porch in a wine-red parka, snow gathered along the shoulders. At 64, she was still straight-backed, though years had narrowed her frame. Her pale hair, silver mixed with faded gold, had been braided over her left shoulder. Gray-green eyes looked past Callum into the cabin. "I heard." He opened the door wider. Ione entered without removing her coat. Farah introduced herself. Ione nodded once, absorbing the presence of medical bags, folded towels, and the old dog near the stove. Scout watched her. Ione stopped several steps away. Callum had expected tears, perhaps anger, perhaps a collapse of the careful distance she had maintained for 9 years. Instead, Ione reached into her coat and removed a small sealed container. Her hands were steady as she opened it. Inside lay a single blue wool glove. Junie's. Callum recognized the repaired seam across the palm. Search teams had used its matching pair for scent work before the storm contaminated everything. Ione lowered herself slowly to one knee and placed the glove on the floor. She did not call Scout. She did not reach toward her. For a while, nothing happened. Then Scout inhaled. Her head moved forward an inch. She smelled the air again, deeper this time. With visible effort, she crawled from the blankets to the glove. Her nose touched the wool. The room went silent. Scout breathed over the glove for a long time. Then she folded her front legs, lowered her chest, and lay across it. Her head sank between her paws. Ione closed her eyes. No sob came. Only one breath, rougher than the others. Callum looked away because witnessing grief could become a kind of trespass. When he looked back, Ione was studying him, not Scout. Him. "Tell me the truth," she said. "I don't know anything yet." "That isn't what I asked." Callum held her gaze. Ione's voice remained quiet. "Do you want to find my daughter?" The question opened something painful and immediate. "Yes." "Or do you want to find a reason to forgive yourself?" Farah did not move. Scout remained over the glove, eyes half closed. Callum could have said the two things were connected. He could have defended the decision to withdraw. He could have repeated weather reports, hypothermia thresholds, and the names of volunteers who had survived because he gave the order. All of it was true. None of it answered her. "I don't know," he said. Ione nodded. It was not approval, but it was the first answer she appeared willing to accept. Farah crossed the room and stood where all three could see her. "Then we begin with what we do know." She pointed toward Scout. "She is 15 approximately. She is dehydrated, arthritic, underweight, and carrying old injuries. Someone cared for her at some point. We do not know who. We do not know where. We do not know what she remembers, and we are not going to hurt her trying to force an answer." Callum said nothing. Farah looked directly at him. "Her health comes first." Then she turned to Ione. "The truth comes second." Finally, she glanced between them. "Whatever either of you needs this to mean comes last." Outside, afternoon light spread across the snowfields, brilliant and cold. Scout shifted her head on Junie's glove, but did not leave it. The tag lay on the table beside the repaired collar, its name visible now. A name Callum had spoken into a storm until his voice failed. A name someone else had carried through 9 winters. Scout had returned. But as Callum stood in the crowded kitchen, he understood that her return did not belong to him. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Benton Sayer arrived in Whistling Pine on a morning of hard blue light. The storm clouds had gone east, leaving the town exposed beneath a winter sky so clear that every roof edge, chimney plume, and snow-laden spruce seemed sharpened with a knife. The highway from Anchorage had reopened before dawn, though Callum suspected Benton had begun driving long before anyone officially declared it safe. His vehicle was an aging maroon Subaru with sandbags in the rear and a small dent above the left headlight. It stopped beside Callum's cabin without ceremony. For a few moments, no one came out. Callum watched from the porch while Scout stood behind him in her borrowed slate blue collar and a support harness Farah had fitted that morning. The old dog was stronger than she had been 2 days earlier, but strength had returned unevenly. Her front legs carried determination. Her hips carried history. The driver's door opened. Benton unfolded himself slowly from the seat. At 63, he was thinner than Callum remembered. A short white beard framed a square face that had once seemed built for smoke, heat, and firehouse arguments. His right shoulder remained broad beneath an old Navy coat, but his left hand rested close to his body, fingers slightly curled from the mild stroke he had suffered the previous spring. His right leg moved first. The left followed half a beat later. He took an old canvas field bag from the passenger seat. Then he looked toward the porch. Scout did not move. Neither did Benton. Callum stepped aside, giving the line between them room. Benton crossed the snow with careful, measured steps. He stopped 10 feet from the dog and removed his wool cap. "Scout?" He did not raise his voice. The final consonant fell low, exactly as it had during training sessions years ago. Scout's ears shifted. Her body tightened beneath the harness. Benton's face changed, but only around the eyes. "Hello, girl." The silence that followed was not empty. It held 9 years of absence, 2 aging bodies, and every reunion people imagined differently before it happened. Scout rose. Her rear legs trembled at once. Callum reached toward the lifting strap, but did not touch it. Farah had warned him not to assist before Scout needed assistance. Pride, even in an old dog, was sometimes part of balance. Scout took 1 step, then another. Benton remained still. She did not run. She did not cry out or leap against him. She walked as if crossing a room filled with broken glass, stopping once to steady herself before moving the remaining distance. When she reached Benton, she smelled his boots, his right hand, the hem of his coat. Benton's mouth opened, but no words came. Scout raised her head and pressed her forehead against his knee. His good hand lowered onto the silvered fur between her ears. That was all. It was enough to make Callum look toward the river. When Benton finally entered the cabin, he placed his field bag on the table and sat in the second chair. Scout settled near his boots, though not touching them. She watched him with the same guarded attention she gave Callum. Benton understood. "You don't owe me anything," he told her. Callum poured coffee. Benton accepted a mug but did not drink. His gaze moved over Scout's collar, the cleaned metal tag, the old leather strap lying in a clear evidence sleeve Farah had improvised from medical packaging. "That's her tag," he said. "No question." "You're certain?" Benton looked at Callum. "I filed the left edge myself after it split my glove during training. See the flat notch?" Callum found it under the light. The mark was small, meaningless to anyone else. Benton traced the air above it without touching. The harness number should have been 714, red body, black chest strap. She hated the reflective patch because it clicked against the buckle. Scout's right ear tilted toward his voice. Benton noticed and smiled without showing teeth. She remembers complaining. He opened the canvas bag. Inside were weathered topographic maps, a signal whistle, a red tracking line wound around a wooden spool, and a binder swollen from years of being stored somewhere too damp. Callum recognized the search grid immediately. Colored grease pencil lines crossed the map, yellow for volunteer sweeps, blue for snowmobile routes, red for scent indications. The eastern ridge had only one short red mark before the search pattern bent south. Benton set a finger on it. She didn't wander off. Callum stood opposite him. I never said she did. You let the report say, "Lost contact with canine." People hear what they want from language like that. The old accusation arrived without heat. That made it harder to resist. What happened? Benton looked down at Scout. She took Junie's scent near the survey posts east of the timber break. Strongest indication she gave all night. Head up, then down, then hard pull. You told me the wind was crossing southeast. It was at ground level. Higher up, it was moving differently. We had whiteout conditions. I know what we had. Callum's hand closed around the coffee mug. Benton's left fingers twitched once before settling. A limb came down behind us, hit my shoulder, knocked me into a spruce well. The line caught on deadfall and snapped at the connector. Scout kept going. You were injured. Yes. The team could not follow safely. I know that too. Benton finally drank. The coffee had gone cold enough that he did not react. She was working, he said. That's what I need you to understand. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't confused. She had something. Callum looked at the red line on the map. 9 years earlier, he had treated that mark as one data point among dozens. A dog indication? A wind variable? A handler injury? A search sector made inaccessible by falling timber. A decision reduced to symbols. Now Scout slept beside the table with Junie's old blue glove tucked near her chest. At noon, Hollister Wren arrived without knocking. He entered carrying a birch walking stick and an expression that suggested doors were only polite obstacles. At 67, Hollis was narrow through the shoulders and tough through the legs, his long face browned by weather. Gray hair touched the collar of his earth-colored anorak. A thick mustache and a short tuft of beard beneath his chin gave him the permanent look of a man about to dispute a forecast. He saw Benton and stopped. "Well," Hollis said, "the dead keep poor calendars." Benton studied him. "You still insult people before removing your hat?" "Only the ones who leave town." Benton took the insult without flinching. "Good to see you, too." Hollis removed his rust-colored cap and looked at Scout. His expression softened so completely it seemed borrowed from another man. "She got old." "So did you," Benton said. Hollis grunted. Scout lifted her head and studied him, then lowered it again. There was no recognition Callum could see. Hollis accepted that more gracefully than most people accepted being forgotten. The final arrival came shortly after 1, announced by a Burro SUV and the brisk closing of 2 doors. Marisol Varden carried 3 waterproof document cases under one arm and a rolled map beneath the other. She was 43, compact and quick, with olive-brown skin and black hair cut to her jaw, one side secured by a straight silver clip. A narrow scar interrupted her right eyebrow. Her red and charcoal SAR jacket appeared almost painfully bright against the cabin's dark wood. She set the cases on Callum's table. "I am here in an unofficial review capacity," she said. Hollis looked at the government plates outside. "Very secretive." "I said unofficial, not invisible." Marisol saw Scout and paused. Her professionalism did not vanish, but it made room for something quieter. "I logged the night she disappeared," she said. Callum remembered her then, a young dispatcher with a headset too large for her head, repeating coordinates while snow hammered the command trailer. Marisol unpacked the records. There were 47 calls in 12 hours, road closures, stranded vehicles, livestock shelters, 2 medical evacuations, and the Alstrom search. Some entries were handwritten when the system failed. She placed one copied page on the table. A short report had been circled in red. Caller reports repeated dog barking east of old postal route. Time uncertain. Visibility poor. Priority low. Benton leaned forward. "What time?" "Between 3 and 5 in the morning. The original log was smudged." "Why wasn't it sent to us?" Marisol met his eyes. "Because I marked it low priority." The room went still. She did not offer an excuse. "I believed the caller was hearing a kennel near the river. I was 24, handling too many channels, and I made a judgment. The report stayed buried until I reviewed the archive yesterday." Callum looked at her. "You were following triage." "I was making choices," she said. "The system was inadequate. That does not make my choice imaginary." Her refusal to ask for comfort changed the room. No one gave it. They spent the afternoon outside, not searching, not yet. Marisol insisted on calling it a behavioral and location assessment, which Hollis claimed was bureaucratic language for walking slowly in expensive coats. Scout traveled in Callum's truck with Ione seated beside her in the rear. Ione had agreed to accompany the first short route, but remained wary of any plan built too quickly from hope. They began at the old SAR shed near the fire hall. The building had become storage for traffic cones, snow fencing, and folding tables. Benton opened the door with a key that still worked after 9 years. Scout stopped at the threshold. Inside, old metal hooks swung faintly from a ceiling rail. One struck another. A thin ringing sound crossed the room. Scout recoiled. Her rear feet slid on the packed snow. She twisted toward the truck, breathing fast. Farah, who had joined them to monitor the outing, raised one hand. "No one crowds her." Callum loosened the lead. Benton lowered himself awkwardly to one knee, but did not call Scout. He simply turned sideways and looked away, making himself smaller. After a minute, Scout stopped pulling. She did not enter. Marisol marked the reaction on her clipboard. The old ski lot brought nothing. Scout smelled tire tracks, watched a raven tear at a paper bag, and became more interested in Ione's pocket than in the trail Junie had once used. At the wooden bridge, she paused to drink from snow Callum melted in his palm, then turned back toward Ione before continuing. "She used to do that," Benton said. "What?" Ione asked. "Check the slowest person." Ione looked down at Scout. "I'm not the slowest." Hollis glanced at her boots. "Not yet." She gave him a look that silenced him for nearly 3 minutes. The inconsistency frustrated Callum more than a clear failure would have. Scout reacted strongly to a rusted survey marker, ignored Junie's old departure point, froze at the sound of a distant wind turbine, and showed no desire to follow the eastern track. He had expected memory to resemble a path. Instead, it came in fragments without labels. At the postal route, Scout stopped. The old road curved behind a line of spruce toward an abandoned storage shed Ione remembered from her years managing remote deliveries. Its roof sagged under snow. One window had been covered with plywood. Scout pulled once, not hard, purposefully. Farah checked her breathing, then nodded. They approached. The door stood partially open, blocked by drifted snow. Hollis cleared it with his walking stick. Callum entered first, testing the floor before letting anyone follow. The shed smelled of dry rot, mouse nests, old fuel, and something faintly animal. Scout stepped inside. No metal rang, no turbine turned. She moved slowly to the back wall and stood before a dark corner. There, beneath a collapsed shelf, lay a dented steel bowl. Benton picked it up. A ring of old mineral stain marked the inside. Beside it was a folded scrap of military blanket, gray-green wool, eaten through by moths. Low scratches scored the lower doorframe, repeated at the height of a large dog's paw. Ione touched the blanket, but did not lift it. "She stayed here." "Someone kept her here," Farah corrected gently. Callum swept his flashlight across the wall. Near a support beam, shallow marks had been cut into the wood. 3 short diagonal lines, a hooked curve, then 2 deeper notches. Hollis moved close. For the first time that day, his certainty disappeared. He removed one glove and traced the shape without touching it. "I know these." Marisol raised her pencil. "From where?" "August Vey." The name meant little to Farah and Marisol. It meant something to Ione. "The trapper?" "Not much of a trapper by the end," Hollis said. "Lived east of the postal route. Marked supply sheds and cached gear with that hook shape. Said paint was for people who trusted weather." Callum looked at the bowl, the blanket, and the repaired collar now photographed on Marisol's tablet. "A V." Hollis nodded. "August Vey." "He died," Ione said. 3 years ago." Scout lowered herself onto the ruined blanket. Not dramatically, not with relief. She simply settled into the hollow, worn into the wool, as if her body remembered its shape. Benton turned away. Callum watched Scout circle once before lying down. The shed was cold, abandoned, and barely standing, but she appeared less restless there than she had in his cabin. Someone had given her water in that bowl. Someone had repaired the leather around her neck. Someone had watched a missing SAR dog grow old without her name ever reaching home. Marisol closed her document case. "This is no longer a search route," she said. "It's a chain of custody." Hollis looked toward the east wall, beyond which the forest rose white and silent. "No," he said. "It's a chain of people." Callum stood beneath the carved mark of a dead man and understood that Scout's survival would not be explained by wilderness alone. She had not merely endured 9 winters. She had passed through lives they had never thought to examine. And somewhere between those lives, the road back to Whistling Pine had been lost again. The county archive occupied the back half of a maintenance building that smelled of dust, cold concrete, and de-icing salt. Nothing about it suggested revelation. There were no locked vaults, no dramatic rows of evidence, only gray shelving, dented file cabinets, and cardboard boxes labeled in handwriting that had faded under years of fluorescent light. A boiler rattled somewhere behind the wall with the stubborn rhythm of an old machine refusing retirement. Marisol Varden signed 3 access forms at a metal desk. The clerk on duty watched her slide the final page across and said, "This is a property review, not a criminal inquiry." "At the moment," Marisol replied. The clerk considered asking more, then looked at the small group waiting behind her and chose self-preservation. Callum stood with Benton and Hollis near the door. Farah had kept Scout at the cabin with Ione, unwilling to subject the old dog to another cold floor and another room full of strange sounds. The decision had irritated Callum for less than a second before he recognized the irritation for what it was. The old belief that nothing important should happen beyond his reach. He had left Scout sleeping beside the stove. That image followed him into the archive. August Vay's remaining possessions filled 6 boxes and 1 narrow wooden crate. After his death 3 years earlier, the county had stored what his sister had not taken: trapping journals, weather logs, hand-drawn maps, expired licenses, veterinary supplies, and several objects the inventory described simply as miscellaneous outdoor materials. Hollis read the label on the first box. Government language for things nobody understood. Marisol opened it. Useful, concise, not sentimental. You practice that voice? Only when you're nearby. Benton sat at the sorting table, easing himself into the chair with one hand braced against the edge. The drive and the previous day's walking had stiffened his left leg. He said nothing about it, and no one insulted him by pretending not to notice. Callum lifted a stack of notebooks tied with faded cord. August's handwriting was narrow and slanted, each entry dated and marked with temperature, wind direction, snow depth, and animal movement. Some pages contained no words at all, only lines showing creeks, ridges, and routes through timber. "He recorded everything," Callum said. Hollis shook his head. "He recorded what he thought mattered. That's not the same thing." The distinction settled over the table. For the next hour, they worked without speaking much. Marisol photographed each page before anyone moved it. Benton compared dates against the original search timeline. Hollis translated August's shorthand. A crossed circle for unstable ice, a double notch for a cached food tin, a hooked line for shelter. Callum read. At first, the journals held only weather and animals. Fox tracks near the western creek. A bull moose with an injured rear hoof. A raven stealing insulation from a shed roof. Then, 11 months after Junie disappeared, one line appeared in the margin of a January entry. Large female dog at East Ridge. Black saddle. Won't approach. Rear leg bad. Callum read it twice. The next mention came 4 days later. Left meat. Gone by dark. Dog watching from timber. Then, dog returned. Leg worse. Took water, but no touch. Benton's hand stopped over the map. Keep going. Callum turned the page. August's entries became more frequent. The dog slept beneath the raised floor of a supply shed. The dog followed him at a distance, but disappeared whenever he carried rope. The dog tolerated food from a pan, but snapped at metal clanging against metal. The dog left for 3 days and returned with blood frozen along the injured leg. No name, only dog. In March, August wrote, "Finally close enough. Tag under old strap. Search animal from town, maybe. Can't read all. She knows work whistle. Does not trust lead. Benton lowered his eyes. Callum felt the words in a place deeper than guilt. Scout had heard the whistle before. Not only his. Someone else had tried. August had not rescued her in one clean moment. He had earned each foot of distance over weeks. Farah's words returned to Callum. Bodies remember care as clearly as harm. He had assumed care would leave obvious marks. A healed wound, a collar, a bowl. He had not considered that patience itself could be evidence. Marisol opened the wooden crate. Inside were glass medicine bottles, gauze sealed in wax paper, a rusted splint brace, and a heavy leather collar darkened almost black with age. The collar was not Scout's current one. A paper tag tied to it read, "Old strap removed. Tag transferred. New leather. Dog calmer with it on." Hollis touched the note with one bare finger. He made her a new collar. "Why keep the old one?" Marisol asked. "August kept bent nails," Hollis said. Man believed anything that had survived work deserved a shelf. Benton gave a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. At the bottom of the crate, Marisol found 2 envelopes. Both were addressed to the Whistling Pine Search and Rescue Office. Both had been returned. One bore a red postal stamp from the year the SAR unit moved from the fire hall to the borough annex. The forwarding period had expired. The second had been sent months later to the fire hall again. Ione would know why. Half the town still used old addresses for years after buildings changed purpose. Marisol read the first letter aloud. August described finding a German shepherd with a damaged SAR tag, injured rear leg, and fear of vehicles. He wrote that the dog would not enter his truck and disappeared for days whenever strangers came near. He asked whether anyone in Whistling Pine had lost a working dog. The second letter was shorter. Same dog still here. Better leg. Comes and goes east. Could belong to Old Winter Search. If someone wants her, come quiet. No uniforms. The room became very still. Benton leaned back. He tried. Callum looked at the returned stamps. 2 envelopes. 2 attempts. A missing dog had come within the reach of a man who did not own a telephone and distrusted town enough to write by hand. The town had changed an address. The letters had failed. No villain had intercepted them. No one had chosen cruelty. A building moved. A forwarding notice expired. A living creature remained lost. Marisol placed the envelopes into a clear sleeve. "This is what systems look like when they fail," she said. "Not always dramatic. Sometimes just one closed office and no one assigned to follow the mail." Callum stared at the paper. 9 years of grief reduced, in part, to administrative weather. The discovery did not lighten anything. It made the loss feel more human. They found the tin near the end of the second hour. It was small enough to fit in one hand, its lid held shut by a strip of cloth. August had written across the top in black marker, "Dog from East Ridge." Marisol opened it with a plastic evidence tool. Inside lay 3 objects: a broken brass buckle, a short length of red synthetic webbing, and a folded piece of oilcloth no larger than a playing card. The oilcloth had been wrapped in wax paper. A note in August's hand was tucked beneath it. Found beneath torn harness strap when cleaning wound. Writing not mine. Too faint to read. Kept dry. Benton's face lost color. That webbing. He did not touch it. Scout's harness? Same type. Marisol moved the lamp closer. The oilcloth resisted unfolding. Its creases had hardened with age, and one edge had worn away. She worked slowly, using tweezers and a thin sheet of clear plastic beneath it. Ink emerged in fragments. Callum recognized Junie's block printing from search forms she had completed years earlier. She wrote the way survey workers often did. Square letters meant to survive rain, gloves, and hurried reading. Only portions remained. Scout heard a gap where water or abrasion had taken the rest, made splint, another break, sent her for help. Then, lower down, east water. The final line ended in a stain. No signature, none was needed. Benton pushed his chair back so abruptly it scraped the concrete. He stood, though standing cost him. She sent Scout away. Hollis looked at the strip of harness. Or tried to. She would not have left Junie on her own. No one said she did. Benton turned toward him. You all said lost contact, dog missing, search animal presumed dead. Reports say what people know at the time. And then people live inside those words. Marisol stepped between the argument without physically moving. This note establishes that Junie was alive long enough to treat Scout and attempt to send her for help. It does not establish exact location, duration, or cause of death. Benton stared at her. You always speak like that? When evidence is fragile, yes. It's her handwriting. I believe it is. Belief is not verification. Callum understood what she was doing. She was protecting the note from becoming a story before it could become proof. He hated the restraint. He trusted it. That contradiction made him tired. By the time they returned to the cabin, evening had turned the snow lavender. Ione sat beside Scout near the stove. Farah was changing the support wrap on the dog's rear leg. Scout lifted her head when the group entered, but did not rise. Callum carried the copies. He had rehearsed several ways to tell Ione. All of them disappeared when she looked at him. We found something, he said. She stood. Marisol explained first. August's journals, the letters, the collar, the harness material. Her voice remained exact, leaving space between fact and inference. Then she placed the protected oilcloth on the table. Ione did not touch it. She read the surviving words. Her face showed no immediate change. Only her left hand moved, closing around the edge of the chair. Junie's writing? Farah asked gently. Yes. Ione's answer came without hesitation. She always made the J too straight. Her teachers complained. A strange tenderness crossed her mouth and vanished. Benton stood at the far side of the room. She kept Scout alive. Ione looked at the old dog. Scout watched her from the blankets, unaware of what had just been restored to the human world. She sent Scout away, Ione said. To find help, Benton replied. Ione crossed the room and sat on the floor beside Scout. She did not take out the blue glove. She rested one palm near the dog's front paw and waited until Scout moved the final inch herself. For the first time, Scout placed her paw over Ione's fingers. The gesture was small. No one spoke through it. Callum felt the urgency arrive before the moment ended. A direction existed now. East, water. August's journals showed repeated absences toward the ridge. Scout had reacted to survey metal and flowing water beneath ice. We go tomorrow, he said. Marisol looked at him. No. The word landed cleanly. Callum turned. We have a weather window. We have a damaged note, one set of journals, and a 15-year-old dog recovering from exposure. Hollis knows the East Ridge. Hollis, to Callum's surprise, did not immediately support him. He knows some of it, Marisol said. The drainage has changed in 9 years. Ice shelves shift. One section near the falls collapsed 3 winters ago. Then we take snow machines to the upper approach. After ice assessment, satellite check-in, medical limits, and a formal team. Every hour we wait. Junie has been missing 9 years. The sentence struck the room cold. Marisol's face softened only slightly. This is not a live rescue, Callum. That does not make it less important. It changes what risks are justified. His body reacted before his reasoning did. His shoulders squared. His breath shortened. The cabin became the old command trailer, full of maps and warnings, while a dog vanished into snow. Hollis saw it. "Here we are again," he said. Callum turned on him. "You wanted the east sector searched?" "I wanted it searched 9 years ago." "And now you want to wait?" "I want to stop letting fear choose the shape of the decision." "You think caution is fear?" "I think yours is." Callum took one step closer. Hollis held his ground, narrow and weathered, birch stick still in one hand. "You were afraid to keep us out there then," Hollis said. "Now you're afraid waiting makes you the same man. Both fears want to command the room." Callum's face went still. Benton spoke from behind them. "I lost Scout because I held the line too tight through deadfall." No one moved. "I spent years thinking if I had let go sooner, she would have moved cleaner. Then years thinking if I had held tighter, she would never have vanished." He looked from Hollis to Callum. "Careful men can worship caution. Reckless men can worship courage. Both will call it duty if no one stops them." Scout shifted on the blankets. The tag at her collar made one faint metallic sound. Callum looked at her. She had lived through Junie's last days, August's patience, failed letters, a barn fire, unknown winters, and the long road back. None of it entitled him to spend what remained of her strength. He unclenched his hands. "What do you need?" he asked Marisol. The room changed. Not dramatically. No one praised him. Marisol opened her waterproof notebook. "I coordinate. Hollis selects approach options, not one fixed route. Farah establishes Scout's travel limit and veto power. Benton stays on communications if his leg won't tolerate the terrain." Benton frowned. "My leg is not improved by pride." Farah nodded in approval. Marisol continued. "Ione chooses whether she goes to the forward station, stays here, or participates only after a site is secured." Ione looked at the note. "I go as far as safety allows, no farther because someone thinks grief makes me brave." Marisol wrote that down. Callum almost smiled. "What about me?" "You lead the field safety section." He absorbed the answer. Not overall command. A role, a boundary, a place among others. "All right," he said. The planning continued into the night. August's maps showed 3 eastward routes. Hollis eliminated one because of avalanche exposure. Marisol requested updated satellite imagery. Farah timed Scout walking across the cabin and porch, watching gait, respiration, and recovery. Scout's reactions offered no clean answer. She stiffened when Benton set a metal survey rod against the wall. She turned sharply when Hollis warmed pine resin over the stove to identify the smell used on old field repairs. Later, when the pipes beneath the cabin knocked and water shifted under river ice, Scout raised her head toward the sound. Not commands, not directions, fragments. Marisol layered those fragments over August's notes and Junie's old survey map. There were 2 frozen waterfalls east of the postal route. Only one stood near abandoned metal survey posts, resin-marked trail repairs, and a narrow valley where water continued moving beneath winter ice. Hollis placed the tip of his pencil on the map. "Here." No one called it the answer. Marisol circled the area lightly. A possibility deserved pencil, not ink. Near midnight, the others left. Ione remained beside Scout while Callum stood over the table, looking at the thin circle east of Whistling Pine. For years, he had imagined redemption as a road he would recognize the moment it opened. Instead, it had arrived as a list of limits written by other people, a veterinarian's veto, a coordinator's authority, an old hunter's route, a mother's choice, a former handler on the radio. Callum looked toward Scout. She was asleep with one paw still touching Ione's boot. Tomorrow they would not follow a miracle into the wilderness. They would follow records, weather, terrain, and the incomplete memory of an old dog. For the first time since Junie vanished, Callum would enter the East Country without pretending the decision belonged to him alone. The search began before sunrise, but no one called it a rescue. That distinction mattered. At 4:30, the Whistling Pine Fire Hall glowed beneath a sky still dark enough to show the stars. Snow machines idled in a disciplined row outside, their exhaust hanging low in the cold. Inside, maps covered 2 folding tables. Batteries warmed beside a portable heater. Every radio had been checked twice, then checked again by Marisol Varden. She stood at the head of the room in her red and charcoal SAR jacket, reading assignments from a waterproof board. Primary team turns back at 1400 whether we have a result or not. No exceptions. Satellite check every 30 minutes. If the ice technician closes a route, it stays closed. No private improvisation. Hollis Wren raised a hand. Marisol did not look up. No, Hollis. I hadn't spoken. You were preparing to. A few volunteers smiled, grateful for humor that did not pretend the morning was ordinary. Callum stood near the equipment table, wearing his steel blue parka over the olive combat shirt, a radio harness crossing his chest. He had been given responsibility for field safety, which meant he reviewed anchor lines, emergency shelter, navigation backups, and evacuation procedures. It did not mean he commanded the search. Each time someone asked Marisol for approval instead of him, an old reflex stirred. Each time, he let it pass. Farah Osei arrived with Scout in the rear of her veterinary van. The old German shepherd wore a supportive steel blue harness with a charcoal lifting strap beneath her hips. A small reflective patch caught the fire hall lights when she moved. Scout looked stronger than she had a week earlier, though age remained visible in every careful step. Her rear legs trembled when she stood too long. Her silvered muzzle lifted toward the open doors, testing air that carried spruce, fuel, wool, and distant ice. Farah held up a small oxygen cylinder. "This is not ceremonial," she said. "Scout walks 10 minutes at a time. She rests before she appears tired, not after. I have absolute medical veto." Hollis leaned toward Callum. "She enjoys that phrase." "She earned it." Farah heard him anyway. "I enjoy it more when ignored men learn." Benton Sayer waited beside the radio desk in an old Navy coat, his red SAR lead coiled on the table. His recovering leg would not tolerate the Eastern Valley, though disappointment sat plainly in his shoulders. Ione Alstrom stood near him in a wine-colored parka. She had insisted on coming as far as the forward station, but no farther unless the site was secured. "No one carries me into a dangerous place because grief has made the schedule inconvenient," she had told Marisol. The forward station was established 4 miles east of the old postal route, in a clearing sheltered by spruce. A heated tent, medical cot, spare radios, oxygen, food, and emergency fuel waited there. When the convoy moved out, the sun had begun to rise. Alaska winter did not brighten gently that morning. Light poured across the snowfields until the whole valley appeared made of glass. Spruce shadows stretched blue over untouched drifts. Farther east, frozen ridges stood beneath a pale sky without cloud or softness. Callum rode behind Marisol, watching the search line unfold through the trees. 9 years earlier, they had entered this country in darkness and violence. Wind had erased tracks as quickly as they were made. Radios had failed. Men had shouted simply to hear themselves remain alive. Now there was only the controlled whine of snow machines and the crisp reports of coordinates over radio. The stillness felt less forgiving. At the forward station, Ione helped Benton arrange the communications log. Scout was allowed to walk a short circle while Farah watched her gait. Before the field team departed, Benton crouched with difficulty beside the dog. He did not give her an old command. He only placed his good hand against the side of her neck. "You don't have to finish anything," he said. Scout smelled his sleeve, then turned toward Callum. Callum clipped the orange lead to her harness. For years he had imagined that if Scout returned, she would demand something from him. Instead, everyone kept telling her she was free to stop. The primary team consisted of Marisol, Callum, Hollis, Farah, Scout, 2 SAR technicians, and an ice specialist named Dana Kessler. Dana was a broad-shouldered woman in her late 30s with copper-red hair tucked beneath a helmet and a habit of striking the snow with a probe before trusting what her eyes reported. She spoke rarely, but whenever she said no, the route changed. They followed the first approach from August's maps along a narrow drainage where wind had exposed dark crust beneath the new snow. Scout showed no urgency. She walked for 7 minutes, stopped to smell a buried root, then turned back to check Farah. At the first rest, she drank warmed water and tried to steal a strip of dried salmon from Hollis's pocket. "She remembers me now?" Hollis said. "She remembers fish," Farah replied. At the abandoned survey line, they found the first metal post. Only 20 inches remained above the snow. Rust had eaten its surface, and a loose identification plate struck the shaft whenever the wind shifted. Clink. Scout froze. The lead tightened, her ears flattened, and her front right paw touched the snow twice in quick succession. Her breathing changed from steady to shallow. Callum lowered his body but did not move toward her. "It's the sound." Benton's old account returned to him, the reflective patch clicking against Scout's harness, the metal of survey markers, the fallen tracking connector. The plate struck again. Scout pulled backward hard enough that her rear legs almost folded. Farah stepped in. "Turn it off." Dana wrapped the loose plate with cloth and secured it. The ringing stopped. No one urged Scout forward. Callum opened his hand near her muzzle. She smelled his glove but did not touch it. "We can go around," he said. Scout looked at the silent post. Then she turned away from the marked trail and pulled toward a rising slope west of the drainage. "Not east," Hollis frowned. "That's wrong," Marisol immediately answered. "According to what?" "The falls are southeast." "And she is not a compass." They followed only as far as the terrain remained safe. The slope was steep but stable, scattered with wind-bent spruce. Halfway up, Scout stopped beside an old wooden marker, almost swallowed by snow. The wood had been repaired long ago with a dark amber material that still held a faint sharp scent when Hollis scraped it with his knife. He smelled the blade. Pine resin and wax. Farah looked at him. "Common?" "For cabin repair. Less common on field stakes unless someone carried a small patch tin." Hollis knelt beside the marker. Junie did. She hated replacing equipment she could mend. Callum remembered a search photograph showing Junie's pack laid open on a table. Survey tape, compass, waxed cord, a little round tin. The clue did not feel like discovery. It felt like finding one sentence in a book after all the other pages had burned. Scout rested before continuing. The route curved around the slope and descended toward a basin where the frozen waterfall came into view. It rose blue and white between dark cliffs, enormous columns of ice gathered over stone. Sunlight passed through the thinner edges, turning them the color of old glass. The main cave opened behind the western curtain of ice. Too obvious, Callum thought. Searchers had checked it 9 years earlier from the lower approach, though the storm had prevented a full examination. Scout looked toward it, then sat down. Hollis waited. She did not move. Callum felt the old urgency pressing against his ribs. Give her time. Farah checked Scout's gums, pulse, and breathing. 5 minutes, then back to the warming shelter. Scout raised her head. A low sound moved beneath the basin. Not a crack, not wind. Water. Even in deep winter, part of the stream still traveled under the ice, hidden but persistent. Scout turned her right ear forward. She stood and angled away from the main cave. The lead guided Callum toward a cluster of broken rock beneath the northern wall. Snow had drifted across it, smoothing everything into one white shape. Dana moved ahead with the probe. "Stop there." Scout stopped before Callum did. Dana tested the surface, then shifted left. Subsurface void. Possible stream channel. The team spread out. Under a shelf of wind-packed snow, Hollis found a narrow cleft between two slabs of stone. It was barely visible from 10 feet away. Cold air moved from it, carrying the wet mineral smell of water under ice. Scout lowered her nose. She did not enter. She stood listening, then her legs began to shake. Farah made the decision. "That's enough. Back to the forward station." Callum looked at the cleft. Scout had brought them no clear command, no triumphant bark, no cinematic certainty. Only fear of metal, the scent of old resin, and attention to hidden water. Fragments. Enough for people to continue. He unclipped her lead from his wrist and handed it to Farah. Scout resisted leaving for 1 second. Then she turned with Farah and walked away. Callum watched until the blue harness disappeared behind the spruce. Marisol contacted the forward station, requested additional equipment, and closed the immediate area. Dana and the second technician examined the rock face, snow load, and ice formation for nearly an hour. Callum waited without touching anything. Waiting had once felt like abandonment. Now it was work. At last, Dana returned. "There's a stable approach on the left side. 2 people only beyond the first chamber. Tethered. No movement near the collapsed section. If I call you out, you come out." Marisol looked at Callum and Hollis. "You two know the original terrain and equipment records. Go carefully. Photograph only. Disturb nothing." They clipped into safety lines. The cleft widened after 10 feet, opening into a shallow stone chamber where the ceiling dropped low enough that Callum had to remove his pack. His headlamp moved across bare rock, old ice, and scattered debris. At first, he saw nothing shaped by human hands. Then Hollis touched his arm. Against the far wall, a broken ski had been wedged between stones as part of a crude wind barrier. A length of faded cord still held one end in place. Callum's breathing slowed. A second piece of ski lay near the floor. He could see where part of it had been cut away. Behind the barrier sat a metal survey case, dented and sealed. Beside it, lines had been scratched into the rock. Groups of 5. Then one final mark, 6 days. Callum photographed them from several angles. Hollis found a jacket buckle beneath loose stone. Farther in, a numbered survey instrument lay partly embedded in frozen sediment. The serial plate was visible. Callum read it once, then compared it with the equipment list stored on his tablet. It matched Junie's assignment. The chamber narrowed toward a collapsed rear section. Stone and old avalanche debris sealed whatever lay beyond. Callum's light settled on a strip of red webbing caught beneath the broken ski. Scout's harness, or part of it. He did not reach for it. Every instinct wanted to touch, to prove, confirm, hold. Instead, he stepped backward. "We have the site." Hollis stared at the 6 marks. All that time. Callum looked toward the collapsed rock. Junie had not vanished in one terrible moment. She had worked, counted, repaired, waited. And when Scout was injured, she had used part of her own equipment to make a splint. Callum radioed Marisol. "Probable shelter site confirmed. Personal and survey items visible. Rear chamber collapsed. No disturbance. Request forensic recovery team." His voice remained steady. Only after the transmission ended did Hollis notice Callum's hand pressed flat against the stone wall. "You all right?" "No." Hollis nodded. This time, the answer required nothing more. They withdrew. The official recovery took the rest of the day and continued the following morning. Ione did not approach until Dana certified a safe route to the outer chamber and the forensic team completed its initial work. The evidence established what no rumor had managed to erase. Junie had survived at least 6 days. She had built shelter, rationed supplies, and treated Scout's injured rear leg with a splint cut from one ski. The oilcloth note had been secured under the dog's harness before Junie sent her away. A later avalanche sealed the rear exit. Junie had not staged her disappearance. She had not abandoned her mother or fled the town. She had made decisions under worsening conditions, some wise and some imperfect, until terrain and cold took away the decisions remaining. No single person caused it. Junie went out alone as the forecast changed. Callum weighted the southern search sector too heavily. Marisol's report remained buried. Scout was injured before reaching help. The storm joined each small failure into something none of them could undo. On the second afternoon, Ione traveled from the forward station to the secured outer approach. Benton walked beside her, one careful step at a time. Farah led Scout, who wore her support harness, and moved slowly over the packed trail. No one spoke when they reached the cleft. Ione did not enter. She sat on a folded pad outside, where sunlight turned the frozen waterfall blue. Scout lowered herself beside her. From her coat, Ione removed Junie's single wool glove. She placed it on the snow between them. For several moments, she looked at the narrow opening in the rock. Then she rested her hand on Scout's silvered neck. "You sent her away to live," she said softly. And she finally found her way home. Scout leaned against her, not toward the cave, toward Ione. Behind them, hidden water continued moving beneath the ice, carrying no answers, offering no absolution. Only the quiet proof that something could remain alive beneath a surface that appeared entirely still. Whistling Pine wanted a podium. By the third day after the recovery team left the Eastern Valley, the borough office had received calls from 2 Fairbanks stations, a regional newspaper, a true crime podcast, and one national producer who used the phrase human interest angle as though grief were a fence line waiting to be measured. Someone suggested the fire hall for a press conference. Someone else suggested the school gym because it had better lighting. Ione Alstrom suggested they all stop using the word event. She sat at Callum's kitchen table with both hands around a mug of tea she had forgotten to drink. Scout lay beside her chair, the old dog's silver muzzle resting near Ione's boot. Afternoon sun crossed the frozen river outside and made the cabin brighter than its occupant seemed prepared to be. "No stage," Ione said. Marisol stood near the county map, reviewing the list of requests on her tablet. The borough would prefer one controlled statement over reporters approaching people separately. They can have a statement. They want questions afterward? No. Callum leaned against the counter. The old version of him would have offered to handle the room. He would have stood between Ione and the microphones, narrowed the message, controlled who spoke and for how long. Instead, he asked, "What do you want?" Ione looked at him for a moment, as though measuring whether the question was genuine. "I want the town to hear what happened without anyone arranging it into a story about a brave man fixing an old mistake." Hollis, seated near the stove, rubbed a thumb over the cracked face of his compass. "That will disappoint several people who have already chosen the brave man." Callum did not smile. Ione continued, "I want the maps shown. I want the missed report read aloud. I want Junie's own field notes included. I want every uncertainty named." Marisol understood first. "Not a press conference." "A reading," Ione said. "The truth. In order. No applause." Benton Sayer sat in the second chair with Scout's old red lead coiled across his lap. His recovering hand moved slowly over the worn fabric. "And if people want to apologize?" he asked. Ione glanced toward the window. "Then they can learn that apologies are not the same as being released." The community hall filled before sunset, 2 nights later. Whistling Pine had gathered there for potlucks, election counts, memorial suppers, and arguments about snow removal budgets. That evening, the long room held none of its usual folding decorations. There was no raised platform, no banner, no enlarged photograph of Junie made soft around the edges for public comfort. Only a row of tables. Maps lay flat beneath clear plastic. Copies of weather records were clipped beside the SAR timeline. Junie's surviving field notes had been enlarged enough to read without turning them into relics. At Ione's request, Scout entered through the side door after the crowd had settled. Farah walked beside her, one hand on the support harness. The old shepherd moved slowly over the polished floor, nails clicking softly. People turned to look, but no one reached for her. Scout chose the space beside Ione's chair and lowered herself with a tired breath. Callum stood near the back wall. Marisol noticed. "You're speaking," she said. "I know." "Then why are you hiding behind the coffee urn?" "I'm assessing structural risk. The coffee is weak, not load-bearing." He looked at her. Marisol's face remained perfectly serious. It helped more than encouragement would have. The borough clerk began with the official findings. Juniper Alstrom had survived for several days in a rock shelter east of the original primary search zone. She had treated an injured SAR dog, constructed an emergency barrier, and attempted to send the dog for help. A later snow event had blocked the rear exit. The available evidence supported accidental death caused by injury, exposure, and terrain. No evidence supported voluntary disappearance. No evidence supported criminal involvement. The words were dry. Ione had insisted on that too. "Facts do not become kinder when decorated," she had said. Marisol spoke next. She stood beside the search map with a mechanical pencil in one hand and the old call log projected behind her. Her voice was steady as she explained the original weather conditions, the overloaded communications network, and the report of barking east of the postal route. Then she read her own notation. Priority low, possible kennel noise. The room shifted. People knew Marisol. They trusted her with missing hunters, overdue snow machines, and river evacuations. Hearing her name, her own failure, changed the temperature of the hall. "I was 24, she said. "I had too many channels and inadequate support. Both are true. It is also true that I made the classification." A man in the second row lowered his eyes. Marisol did not ask anyone to forgive her. She described the changes already approved for call triage, dual review for location-linked reports, automatic escalation of animal sounds during active searches, and preserved routing logs whenever a command post changed location. Her mistake was not presented as confession alone. It had become procedure. Hollis followed. He stood without notes, one hand resting on his birch stick. "I argued for the Eastern Ridge," he said. "That does not mean I knew where Junie was." Several faces turned toward him. For years, Hollis had spoken as if being ignored were nearly the same as being right. That evening, he gave up the comfort of that version. "I had terrain knowledge. I had instinct. I did not have proof. After the search, I went back twice without authorization, found nothing, broke 3 ribs once, and nearly made other people risk themselves to retrieve me." A faint ripple of humor passed through the room. Hollis let it. Being right about one direction does not make every reckless choice wisdom. He sat before anyone could mistake honesty for humility performed too long. Benton's account came quietly. He described Scout's indication near the eastern survey line, the snapped connector, and the fallen limb that injured him. He did not dramatize the moment Scout vanished. "She was doing her job," he said. "That is the part I need recorded correctly." Scout lifted one ear at his voice. Benton looked down at her, but did not call her name. "She did not fail to return because she forgot us. She was injured while staying with Junie. Junie sent her away." His voice roughened. "She carried that order farther than any of us knew." No one applauded. The silence was better. Then Callum's name was called. He walked from the back wall to the tables without notes. The room seemed smaller from the front. He saw road workers, church volunteers, retired teachers, people who had searched 9 years earlier, and people who had only inherited the story. He saw Farah near the side door, arms folded, watching him with the expression she used when deciding whether a man required medicine or correction. Ione did not look away. Callum placed both hands on the edge of the table. The order to withdraw was mine. A chair creaked. Visibility had collapsed. 2 volunteers were showing signs of hypothermia. Benton was injured. Continuing would likely have created more casualties. He paused. That decision was necessary. The words had lived inside him for 9 years, repeated like a legal defense. This time he continued. I also gave too much weight to the southern wind model. I treated Scout's eastern indication as less reliable after contact was lost. We did not build a strong enough return plan for the first safe weather window. We did not assign one person to preserve unresolved reports when the command post closed. His right thumb moved once across the edge of his field watch. I have spent years wishing one part of that night would become the whole truth. Either I saved the team or I failed Junie. Either caution was right or instinct was right. He looked toward the maps. That is not what happened. No one person had caused Junie's death. That truth was harder than blame. Junie had traveled alone while the forecast was changing. Callum had narrowed the search too quickly. Marisol had underestimated a report. Benton had been injured. Scout had been hurt. The storm had altered terrain faster than maps could explain it. None of those facts erased the others. Callum's voice lowered. If you need one hero, you will miss the people who actually kept Scout alive. Junie, who made the splint. August Vey, who fed a frightened dog for weeks before he could touch her. Whoever left scraps near winter cabins. Whoever filled a bowl and never knew her name. Scout shifted beside Ione. The metal tags at her collar made a faint double note. That is the record, Callum said. Not one man's redemption. He returned to the back wall. This time he was not hiding. The most difficult part came afterward. Ione stood beside a table holding copies of Junie's employment application to Anchorage and a brief transcript of an argument reported by a neighbor 9 years earlier. The rumor had begun there. Junie had considered leaving Whistling Pine. She had argued with Ione about taking a surveying job farther south. After the search failed, someone posted online that Junie had planned her disappearance to escape debt, family pressure, and town life. No evidence had ever supported it. But the lie had offered something the weather had not, a person to blame who could not answer. Ione read the original post aloud. The words sounded smaller in the hall than they had online. A man named Curtis Bell rose from the 4th row. He was in his late 50s, broad through the middle, with a red face and hands accustomed to mechanical work. Callum knew him from the fuel depot. Curtis had shared the rumor many times, often prefacing it with, "I'm only saying what people heard." He removed his cap. "I repeated that," he said. Ione waited. "I didn't write it, but I repeated it." Still she waited. Curtis looked around as if hoping the room might help him carry the next sentence. "I was wrong. I'm sorry." The apology hung in the open space. Some people visibly relaxed, ready for the familiar ending in which pain was acknowledged and everyone became better. Ione did not offer it. "You said it to customers," she replied. "At the fuel counter, at the diner. You said my daughter had cost the borough money and run away." Curtis swallowed. "Yes." "You said it after I asked you to stop." "Yes?" Scout raised her head. Ione's hand settled on the old dog's neck. "I believe you're sorry tonight." Curtis looked up. "That does not tell me what you will say next winter when someone else goes missing and cannot defend herself. The room grew very quiet. An apology matters when it changes the next story you tell, Ione said, not only how you feel about the last one. Curtis nodded slowly. He did not ask whether she forgave him. That was the first useful thing he did. After the reading, reporters were given the official packet and no private interviews. Townspeople remained behind, moving among the maps in subdued groups. Callum found himself beside the maintenance route display. The Eastern Valley showed long gaps between existing emergency shelters. Utility crews traveled nearby, but the electrical stations themselves could not safely house the public. A thought that had been forming since the cave finally found a shape. He asked Marisol for a pencil. On a blank overlay, he marked 3 sites away from live equipment, but near plowed service access. "What is that?" Hollis asked. "Independent winter cabins." Marisol came closer. Callum drew compact structures with insulated walls, a fixed-frequency radio, emergency beacon, thermal blankets, first aid supplies, and inspection logs tied to existing maintenance routes. "Not inside utility stations," he said. "Separate liability, separate locks, close enough for scheduled checks." Hollis studied the terrain. "This one floods in spring." Callum moved the mark uphill. Farah pointed to the northern site. "Medical kit needs cold-rated storage." Marisol added it to the margin. Ione joined them last. "What are you calling it?" "Nothing yet." "Good." She looked at the eastern route. "The first one can use Junie's field instructions, the shelter sequence, how to mark wind, how to ration heat." Callum nodded. "Alstrom Light," Benton said from behind them. Ione turned. He seemed prepared for refusal. Instead, she considered the name. "Not Junie's Memorial." "No? Not Bracewell Station?" Callum answered before anyone else. "Absolutely not." A small smile passed through Ione's face. "Alstrom Light," she agreed, "for finding the living." Several weeks of legal work followed. The old SAR unit no longer existed as an independent entity, and Scouts' ownership records had passed through a dissolved borough program. Marisol worked with Animal Control and County Council to establish custody. Benton had priority consideration as Scout's former handler. He declined. The conversation took place on Callum's porch at dusk, with Scout asleep inside near the stove. Benton held the old red lead between both hands. "My apartment has stairs," he said. "My balance is poor. Some mornings I can't close my left hand." "You could move." "I could also make a decision for her based on what I miss." Callum looked through the window. Scout slept with her head near the northern door, though she no longer stared at it all night. "She knows you?" Callum said. "Yes." Benton's answer held no bitterness. "And she trusts you now." Callum did not accept the statement easily. Benton saw that. He placed the red lead in Callum's hands. The webbing was faded and soft from years of use. Near the handle, one seam had been repaired in black thread. "She does not belong to you because you found her." "I know." "No, you understand the sentence. That is not always the same." Benton folded Callum's fingers around the lead. "You get the chance to prove every day that she chose the right place to stay." Inside, Scout woke. She rose slowly and came to the porch door. For one moment, she stood between the two men, looking first at Benton, then Callum. Benton opened the door. Scout stepped outside and rested her head briefly beneath his hand. Then she moved to Callum's side. No command had been given. Benton's eyes shone, but his voice remained steady. "Well," he said, "she has always been opinionated." Callum looked down at the old dog leaning against his leg. No argument there. Across Whistling Pine, porch lights came on one by one as evening settled over the snow. The town had wanted a hero because heroes made sorrow easier to arrange. What it received instead was a record of errors, kindness, neglect, courage, and ordinary hands reaching across years without ever knowing whether they had succeeded. It was not a clean story. It was finally an honest one. By late winter, Whistling Pine had learned to build in daylight. The first months after Junie's recovery had been filled with meetings, permits, route surveys, arguments about insulation ratings, and enough donated lumber to construct either 3 emergency shelters or 1 unusually judgmental barn. Callum preferred the shelters. They stood along the eastern forest corridor, small and square beneath steep metal roofs designed to shed snow. Each cabin sat away from active power equipment, but near routes already checked by utility crews. Inside were thermal blankets, sealed food, cold-rated first aid kits, a fixed-frequency radio, chemical heat packs, and an emergency beacon mounted inside a red box. The first shelter, Alstrom Light, had been built on higher ground above the drainage Hollis rejected as a spring flood risk. The second stood near the old postal route. The third marked the northern junction where 3 trails crossed and storms erased direction with unusual enthusiasm. No plaque carried Callum's name. That had been his first successful contribution. Marisol designed the inspection schedule with the severity of a person who believed paper could prevent tragedy if properly sharpened. Every shelter had 2 assigned inspectors, 1 alternate, and a log that recorded date, temperature, battery voltage, radio function, beacon test, food seal, roof load, and visible animal damage. Hollis trained volunteers to read terrain without trusting trail markers more than weather. He made them practice turning back until the act stopped feeling like failure. Farah selected medical supplies that could survive deep cold and removed half the donated items people had brought after watching too many wilderness programs. No expired antibiotics, she said. No mystery pills in sandwich bags. And whoever donated whiskey has misunderstood both medicine and storage policy. The bottle vanished before anyone claimed it. Ione managed communications records from a desk inside the fire hall. She wore reading glasses low on her nose and corrected radio logs with a red pencil that made grown men feel they had disappointed a stern but fair headmistress. The volunteers feared her. They also never missed a check-in. Callum split his time between power line work and shelter construction. He installed radio mounts, reinforced doors, and wired low-draw signal lights powered by independent battery packs. Each light could be activated remotely from the fire hall or locally by the emergency beacon. At night, when the cabins were tested, 3 small amber points appeared among the dark spruce. Not bright enough to defeat winter, bright enough to answer it. Scout watched the work from whichever safe place Farah allowed. She lived with Callum now in the cabin beside the frozen river, though the official adoption process was still completing its final signatures. He had built 2 low steps beneath the porch, added rubber-backed runners across the floor, and moved his second chair closer to the stove because Scout preferred sleeping where she could see both doors. She still rose whenever the wind changed. Before settling at night, she inspected the kitchen, the hall, and the northern entrance. If ice shifted loudly in the river, her right ear tipped forward and remained there until the sound passed. Callum did not tell her she was safe. The word asked too much of a creature who had survived by distrusting certainty. Instead, he checked the door with her. The first time he did it, Scout looked up as if surprised to find him participating in an old duty. By the 7th night, she inspected one door and left the other to him. That was how trust developed between them, not through surrender, but division of labor. The morning Alstrom Light officially opened, sunlight spread across the valley in a thin gold band. Winter still held the land, but water had begun darkening the edges of the river ice. Snow slipped from spruce branches in soft collapses, and the air carried the first faint suggestion that cold was no longer permanent. Most of Whistling Pine gathered near the shelter. There was no ribbon. Ione had rejected one. "There is nothing useful about blocking a door and then celebrating cutting the blockage," she said. Instead, Marisol demonstrated the beacon. Farah explained the medical kit. Hollis showed 2 routes back to the main road and 1 route no one should use after heavy snow. Callum stood beside the door while Scout rested on a padded mat near Ione. Someone asked him to speak. He had prepared 4 sentences. He discarded 3. "This cabin exists because many people kept a dog alive without knowing whether their kindness mattered." The group quieted. Junie kept Scout alive long enough to send her for help. August Vey fed her until she allowed him close. Other people left food near sheds and fishing camps. Some of them never knew her name. Callum rested one hand on the wooden doorframe. "This place is for the same kind of work. Someone you may never meet might need what you leave behind." He stepped away before anyone mistook brevity for lack of meaning. Scout gave one small huff from the mat. Ione glanced down. "She says the speech needed editing." "Everyone has notes," Callum replied. The laughter came gently. Then Marisol's radio sounded. 1 tone. Pause. 3 more. The entire gathering changed shape. Marisol lifted the receiver. "Command, this is Varden. Repeat emergency traffic." Static answered, followed by a dispatcher's voice. 2 adult backcountry travelers had failed to reach a scheduled pickup north of the junction. Their satellite messenger had transmitted a partial distress signal before losing connection. Last confirmed location placed them near the 3rd shelter. Callum felt movement surge through his body. For 1 second, the road ahead simplified itself. Truck, gear, north, go. The old instinct was fast and convincing. He turned toward Marisol instead. "What do you need?" She was already opening her waterproof board. "Benton on base radio. Hollis, give me route hazards from last night's wind. Callum, confirm shelter signal status and utility access. Dana's team takes field deployment." No one looked to Callum for final approval. The absence no longer felt like loss. Benton moved toward the fire hall communications vehicle. His old red lead looped over one wrist, though Scout would not be using it. Hollis spread a route map across the hood of a truck and marked 2 zones where snow had loaded behind the ridge. Farah checked the warming equipment and emergency medical packs. Ione took Scout's lead. Callum looked at the old dog. Her head was up. She understood urgency, if not its target. Her body shifted forward, prepared by habit to follow. He crouched beside her. "Not this one." Scout watched his face. "You've done enough." The words sounded inadequate. Scout looked past him toward the idling snow machines. Her front paw moved once against the mat. Then Ione touched her shoulder. "Stay with me," she said. Scout turned toward Ione and lowered herself again, though her ears remained fixed on the departing team. Callum stood. Leaving her behind did not feel like abandonment. That difference nearly undid him. The search unfolded across radios and map coordinates rather than through one man's fear. The partial distress signal placed the missing pair west of the North Junction. Dana Kessler's team approached from the safer ridge, while another unit checked the Frozen Creek route. Callum confirmed that Shelter 3's beacon had not activated, but its exterior signal light remained functional. Marisol directed the team to trigger the shelter lights remotely. Across the valley, one amber point illuminated, then another, then the third. From the porch of Alstrom Light, Scout and Ione watched those lights appear in sequence between the trees. The sight traveled farther than brightness should have been able to travel. At the fire hall, Benton relayed updates in a voice that remained calm even when static swallowed half the words. Hollis revised the wind model as new reports came in. Farah prepared for exposure and possible fractures. Callum monitored the service road and utility access, ready to move equipment if ordered. Ready, but not moving simply to escape the waiting. An hour passed, Then a weak beacon signal appeared from Shelter 3. Not continuous. 3 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Marisol bent over the receiver. Field 2, confirm local beacon activation. The response arrived, broken by static. Confirmed. 2 occupants inside, conscious. 1 probable ankle injury, mild hypothermia, shelter heat packs deployed. The fire hall exhaled. No one cheered yet. The field team still had to reach them. The missing travelers, a married couple in their early 40s named Paige and Nolan Reeves, had lost the trail when wind buried their markers. Nolan injured his ankle crossing a drifted ravine. They found the northern shelter after seeing its amber signal light through the trees. Inside, they activated the beacon, wrapped themselves in thermal blankets, and used the radio instructions posted beside the door. They survived because the cabin had been there, because Marisol had written a check protocol, because Ione had insisted the radio card use plain language, because Hollis moved the site uphill, because Farah chose equipment that still worked below zero, because utility crews kept the access route clear, because a town had built something before it was needed. When the recovery team brought Paige and Nolan into Whistling Pine near dusk, Nolan apologized repeatedly for creating trouble. Hollis met him at the ambulance door. Trouble is when you ignore the shelter and make us hunt your frozen pride. Paige laughed through chattering teeth. Farah pointed toward Hollis. He is not part of the medical service. Yet, Hollis said. That evening, the final adoption papers waited on Callum's kitchen table. Marisol had dropped them off without ceremony. Benton had signed the former handler acknowledgement. The borough transferred ownership after completing Scout's medical and care review. Scout lay near the stove, watching Callum hold the pen. The form used ordinary words. Female German Shepherd, estimated age 15. Former SAR canine. Permanent placement approved. Callum signed his name. Nothing changed immediately. The stove remained hot. The river remained frozen. Scout scratched once behind her ear and looked mildly inconvenienced by the legal importance of the moment. Callum attached the cleaned SAR tag beside the new brass tag on her slate blue collar. The 2 pieces of metal touched with a soft, uneven chime. "Official," he said. Scout sneezed. He took that as a measured response. That night, he dreamed of the original search. The dream did not spare him. Wind erased the trees. The tracking line snapped. Scout vanished beyond the headlamp beam, and Junie's unanswered radio call broke into static. Callum woke before dawn with his hand clenched against his chest. For several seconds, he did not know which winter held him. Then he heard breathing. Slow. Steady. Scout slept beside the bed on the runner he had placed there. Her paws moved faintly beneath the silvered fur, chasing something through a dream of her own. Callum lowered his hand. The past had not disappeared. It simply no longer stood over him, demanding a verdict. Morning came clear. When Callum opened the cabin door, cold light spilled across the floor. Beyond the frozen river, the eastern forest rose dark beneath fresh snow. Far off, the emergency cabins appeared as tiny amber marks between the spruce. Scout stepped onto the porch, descended the low stairs, and found a patch of sunlight. She turned once before lying down. Callum carried his coffee outside and sat beside her. He placed one hand on her back, feeling the warmth beneath the black and gold coat, the steady rise and fall, the life that had passed through so many hands before reaching his. He had once believed redemption meant proving the worst moment of his life did not define him. Now he understood differently. It was not innocence. It was maintenance. Checking batteries before they failed. Listening when someone challenged the route. Building shelter for strangers. Returning tomorrow to do the same work again. Across the river, the lights remained visible in the winter trees. Scout slept beneath his hand, and Callum sat with her in the bright cold morning, knowing some mistakes could never be repaired backward. They could only be carried forward until they became something that kept another person alive. Some mistakes cannot be undone, but they can still teach us what to build next. Callum could not change the night Junie disappeared. What he could change was how carefully he listened, how willingly he shared responsibility, and whether another lost traveler would find warmth where there had once been only darkness. Perhaps grace is not always a miracle that erases the past. Sometimes it is the strength to turn regret into shelter. If this story stayed with you, share what it meant to you in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances. May God give you wisdom for the choices ahead and peace with the roads behind you.